Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. April is almost over. Can you believe that? A whole month of April. April showers bring May flowers, and May is almost here. Only a couple of days away, and that means that it is officially a Marvel release week. That's right. We got Thunderbolts coming out later this week. But before we pass the baton of box office success, hopefully, from one original IP to another, we're going to talk a little bit about the hottest original IP of the moment, at least for the last week and a half. I want to do a deep dive. And when I say a deep dive, I'm not necessarily talking about spoilers, right? I had a spoiler conversation about Sinners a couple of weeks ago when I did my review. No, I want to talk about all of the discourse and all of the great stuff and nonsense surrounding the conversation with Sinners, truthfully. And we'll get all that out of our system, and we'll talk about it now, and surely it will come up again down the road later, or the next time we talk about Ryan Coogler, or Michael B. Jordan, or Wunmi Masaku, or Haley Steinfeld, or Delroy Lindo, or any of the other incredible cast and crew from that film. But we're going to talk about it here in this show, and then we're going to pass the baton to Thunderbolts and get back to our franchise IP watching, which I have a bit of a bone to pick with respect to some sentiments about that as well that you're going to hear in this particular episode. But before diving into all of that ranty goodness, I want to remind everyone listening to this show that it is part of the Flightcast podcast network. I guess it is technically a podcast network because you can find this show and all of my other shows at theflightcast.com, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcast, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora, or any other preferred podcatcher that you used. All available there and at theflightcast.com. There's this show, the main show that comes out on Mondays. There's Flight Box, which comes out on Wednesdays. That's my TV review show. We are currently in the middle of Andor Season 2. That's right. We've talked about the first 3 episodes, the first 3-episode arc of Andor Season 2 last Wednesday. Actually, it was last Thursday because it was a day late. But this week, it should be on Wednesday. I'm endeavoring to stick to that schedule. So get ready for Week 2 of Andor Season 2 chatter. Yes, we'll have quite a bit to say about this week's 3 episodes, I have no doubt. That is on Wednesday, and then we do the listener feedback show Friday Flight on Fridays. I'll see if I can get a beer for this week because I did not have one for last week. And then, of course, stay tuned this weekend for my review of Thunderbolts because I will be seeing that in theaters. It will be an opening weekend release. For me, I will maintain my streak with respect to the MCU. It will be movie 36. 36 MCU films since 2008. Can you believe that? Almost exactly 17 years to the date. Because if I remember correctly, the first Iron Man film came out like first week or so of May in 2008. So yeah, MCU film number 36. I will be posting that review this weekend for Thunderbolts. So stay tuned for that as well. And of course, also want to thank all of the supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much for your very loyal support. Hope that you've been enjoying the bonus content. I most recently have been posting flight reviews of movies that you more than likely have watched that I have not watched before. I've talked about Hellraiser, I've talked about Uncle Buck, I've talked about Dunkirk, I've talked about Soul from Pixar, and I most recently talked about Purple Rain because I finally watched that film for the first time ever on the 9-year anniversary of Prince's death. So I have been more consistently checking films off of the Ballyhooed list lately, and I've been posting those reviews at patreon.com/theflightcast. Hope that if you are a flight officer that you have been enjoying the bonus content. Hope that you enjoy the more bonus content that I have going. I mentioned before that there is an animated franchise that I have been wanting to get into for a number of years, a particular genre of animation that I have wanted to dive headfirst further into, and I've been collecting it for the last year, and I have just about all of it at the moment, and I want to start watching it from the beginning as far as release dates with respect to that, and stay tuned for that review, that episode of Flight Review later this week on patreon.com/theflightcast, because it'll be the first of those movies, and when you see what it is, you may or may not be interested. Here's hoping. Those of you that are fans of Japanese animation, that is your biggest hint. Yes, a particular studio franchise, if you will, that has a number of films that I shall be partaking in. I probably have given up the ghost right there for many of you. But if you were so inclined, you can go ahead and listen at patreon.com/theflightcast when those reviews are posted. Thank you so much for those of you who support me at patreon.com/theflightcast. And thank you to those of you who are interested in signing up to be flight officers and supporting me and enjoying the bonus content there as well. All right, let's get into it. I know that many of you are in Marvel mode, can't wait for Thunderbolts this upcoming week, and I know a number of you did see The Accountant 2 this past weekend. I haven't seen the first one, so I've got to watch the first one, which apparently is on Max, that you can watch the first one before even thinking about seeing the second one. And I'm sure many of you are preparing yourselves for what could be a very eventful summer movie box office season, if you will, because we got a lot coming up here. We got Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. We've got the How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch live action reboots, if you will. We've got Jurassic World Rebirth, which is actually the 7th film in that franchise. We got a new Final Destination movie. And of course, we've got Super Fantastic coming up in July. That's right, Superman and Fantastic Four only 2 weeks apart in that regard. But before getting into all of that, we've got to take a little bit of time here to talk about the Hollywood darling at the moment. The Hollywood darling that has been, propped up and lauded in certain circles, in a lot of circles, and yet taken down a peg as much as possible in other more cynical and bigoted circles, if you will. And that, of course, is the Ryan Coogler magnum opus known as Sinners. Yes, I'm calling it his magnum opus. And I'm saying this having only seen 4 of his 5 feature films. There is one that I have not seen. The one that I have not seen is actually his first feature film, Fruitvale Station. And I've talked before about why I haven't watched that particular movie yet, because you got to be in a mood, right? As a black person, like personally for me, like just my own perspective, you can't be having a great day, right? You can't have an awesome day at work or an awesome day wherever you're doing, or a day off or whatever. Like, let me go ahead and relax and just kick my feet up and enjoy life, and then put in a movie about that, right? Because I know what the movie is about. I know, like, I've read about the Oscar Grant story, so I know what it's centered around. It's going to be a tough watch. And I've heard it's an excellent film, and I will watch it. That's probably going to be another episode of Flight Review for Patreon at some point in the not-too-distant future, because then I will have seen all of Ryan Coogler's movies, which is interesting because with respect to the other 4 that I've watched, obviously both of the Black Panther movies and now Sinners, but then there's also Creed, which I've seen probably 95% of Creed. For some reason, I didn't finish like the last 10 minutes of it, and I don't remember why. I'm going to rewatch the whole thing. I'm definitely going to rewatch the whole thing, and maybe that'll be another episode of Flight Review, to be honest with you. But I've seen most of it, and I remember enjoying it for what it was at that time, for how I regarded both Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler at that point in time. But yeah, I think that Sinners clearly right now, as far as the films that I've seen of his, I think it is definitely his magnum opus. And I would say that, even with Black Panther sitting there and, all the criticisms aside of the third act and the visual effects and the CGI and all that bullshit and all that whatnot, yes, all that aside, Black Panther is an absolutely phenomenal film. And it's interesting because we went and saw Sinners again, and it was my second time seeing it this past weekend. So I've seen it twice. Shonda accompanied me this time. We made a date night of it, and she saw it for the very first time, and she thoroughly enjoyed it. And, one of the things that we commented on was how this really was, culturally speaking, very similar to Black Panther in terms of it being kind of a circle the wagons moment for the black community. This is, one of our own that has made an incredible piece of original work, not based off of a previous IP, not based off of, anything licensed by Warner Brothers or Marvel Studios or anything like that, right? Like something completely and wholly original from the creator himself, the original content that so many people have been clamoring for on film threads and on social media, the film elites that are like, enough with these franchises, enough with superhero films, enough with all of these sequels and prequels and reboots and remakes, give us something original that we can sink our teeth into. And so many times that happens, and the original movie is put out there and they don't go see it. And, it's a twofold issue, because it's not just that the people who clamor for these original films don't go see them. It's also because the studios don't put 100% of their effort into the marketing and the promotion of these films as they would if it were a Marvel film or a DC film or Star Wars or anything of that nature, anything franchised in that regard. And we have a unique situation here with Ryan Coogler and the marketing for Sinners. I mean, clearly it has not necessarily reached everyone, because I know a few of you, like John and a couple of others, have said, hey, this movie wasn't really on my radar. I haven't seen a whole lot about it until you started talking about it on your show. And so clearly it's one of those where it's like, all right, the marketing has not reached everyone, but it has absolutely been like the face of Hollywood conversation for the past week and a half. And it's been a very intriguing conversation, because we started off with this whole idea of, well, how strong can it be? Like the first, I think, a week before the movie came out, it was all about the Rotten Tomatoes scores, what that hell site, of course. But it comes out with 100%, and it was 100% for a number of days. And I knew it wasn't going to stay at 100%, because there's always some jackass that's got to have a negative review. There are people out there are critics out there that go, for the as much of a crutch as Rotten Tomatoes is, it still is bothersome, and this speaks to even more the lack of validity to Rotten Tomatoes, that somebody out there has got to go, well, no movie can be 100%. I must give it a negative review. Like, I hate that assholes like that exist, because that level of cynicism is just unneeded and unnecessary and not really helpful, right? And those are the types of cynics that, like, well, I need to give everybody a bite of a reality sandwich. No, you don't. You need to go sit in the corner and leave us alone while we try to be happy, and you just stay a miserable misanthrope for the rest of your pathetic ass life. I don't like people like that whatsoever. They just have to drop a bomb of shit on everybody's happiness. No, I don't like those people. But even so, 97% fresh, certified, right? It got everybody's attention, right? Oh my goodness, could this movie really be that good? And then we go see it opening weekend, and it's like, yeah, it's that good. It's absolutely, without question, that good. And again, if you want to hear my full spoiler-filled thoughts on it, you can go and listen to my episode of Flight Review from the opening weekend about a week and a half or so ago. I give all my full thoughts there. But as soon as this movie came out, I was like, okay, what's it going to do at the box office? And I didn't talk about the box office in my review because I posted it before the final numbers came through. But it beat out Minecraft. It absolutely beat out Minecraft. And Minecraft was in its third or fourth week of release. So it was one of those cases where, all right, the windfall had happened, and maybe the legs for a movie like that weren't going to be that long. But still, it had to be dethroned. And Sinners, an original IP, 100% dethroned a franchise film. A franchise film based off of a video game. And it did so by at least $4 or $5 million. And of course, everybody saw that Variety headline that was posted on social media that said, Sinners has amassed 61 million in its global debut. It's a great result for an original R-rated horror film, yet the Warner Brothers release has a $90 million price tag before global marketing expenses, so profitability remains a ways away. Intriguing that, they would post that particular headline. But, somebody pointed out earlier today, I saw this actually yesterday on Threads, somebody compared that headline with a headline that came out for The Accountant 2 this past weekend, which said that movie audited 9.4 million in ticket sales across Friday and preview screenings. The action sequel, which sees Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal return as fraternal assassins, is looking at a 25 million opening weekend. And I've seen headlines like this before from Variety where they take a neutral stance with respect to certain movies and their opening weekends, right? Where they just very matter-of-factly report them the way that they did, like The Accountant 2 was reported. And then I see other times where they absolutely take a slant. They absolutely take a bent. And to be fair, on some level, they don't always do it with films that are directed by black people. There are definitely times where they do it with Marvel films or DC films because they know that that's going to get the clickbait, that's going to get the clicks and the headlines and the attention if they slant it in a particularly negative light where it's going to get the ire up and start the conversations and get everybody going because they just want their reach. But here's the thing, Variety. Was it necessary for you to do that for Sinners? Because Sinners isn't part of Marvel or DC. It's not part of a bigger IP. It's an original, black-written, black-directed horror film. And I say horror, I use that term loosely because even though it's classified as a horror movie, it really does transcend the genre as far as I'm concerned, subjectively speaking. But, why would you report so differently? Like, who gives a shit about the global marketing expenses and profitability of an original horror film? Like why? Who told you to do that, Variety? We're pretty sure who told you to do that. It goes hand in hand with these articles that we've been seeing about how Ryan Coogler's incredible deal that he received for Sinners is going to break Hollywood. And I might have talked a little bit about this in the review. I don't remember if I did, but just to be very clear here, Sinners had a $90 million production budget, made $61 million globally in its opening weekend, and on top of that was the first horror movie in 35 years to get an A cinema score, right? An A cinema score. That doesn't happen very often. And what have we heard about? What have people told us? All the Marvel slaps and all of the franchise fans. What have they told us about an A cinema score? Well, you have to get that in order to get anywhere close, in order to even be capable of making $1 billion. And nobody was saying Sinners is going to make $1 billion. Nobody's saying that at all. But remember, cinema scores are important, right? We want to rank everything. We want to classify everything. And a cinema score is important because that's all about word of mouth. And we've heard that a whole lot as DC fans in the last 9 years. Is a word of mouth. Word of mouth's got to be strong. The audience has really got to gravitate toward it. If it has weak word of mouth, a B's just not going to cut it. And C and D shouldn't even be made. Like, those should be removed from theaters because clearly the audience isn't interested. Well, this was an A. This one was 100% certified an A cinema score. That means strongest word of mouth that you could possibly have in this regard, right? Except maybe an A plus, I suppose, right? Are we going to measure Sinners on that? Well, I'm sure there's some people that are. But why would Variety put out the headline like this? Why would they immediately question the profitability of this film? You're going to say, come on, Ray, don't make it obvious. Not everything is about, yes, unfortunately, everything is about race. Unfortunately. And you know me, I don't necessarily like to get social political on the regular, but there are definitely times, as I've mentioned before, where this kind of stuff does intersect into our movies, TV, and other sort of media, and this is one of those times, guys. The reason that Hollywood, you see these headlines about Hollywood is freaking out over this deal, and for people who don't know the deal that Ryan Coogler got, one more time I'll reiterate it. He gets a share of first gross from the movie's earnings, which most directors don't get that. He also got final cut on the picture, which that's also something that most directors don't get, because usually it's producers and others in the studio that has final cut with respect to, what. That's why we have director's cuts, right? Because the studio says, here's the cut that you're going to put in theaters. And this is where producers get their grubby, uninformed, non-creative, assholey hands on it and go, hey, lop off this entire subplot of Lois Lane examining exactly what Lex Luthor's plot is against Superman, or completely cut out this entire section of Clark Kent investigating Batman from Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. That's what they do for people that don't know what happens when a studio has final cut. They lop off important parts of the movie because they want to get the runtime down to have more show times in the theaters, because that's all they're thinking about. Return on investment and profitability in that regard. Ryan Coogler retained final cut, so he was able to say, this is the final version. So there's a scene in the movie, and Delroy Lindo confirmed this. I will keep it spoiler-free for anybody that hasn't seen the movie yet. But Ryan Coogler, there was a scene originally in the film that it's a discussion that is had in the car. For people who have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Discussion that is had in the car between Stack, Delta Slim, and Preacher Boy, Sammy. And Delta Slim is telling them a story, a very emotional, a very powerful, and a very heart-wrenching story that, according to Delroy Lindo in an interview, was originally a 3-page monologue. And it was he said he went through the process, and Ryan Coogler gave him the space to, set it aside, rehearse it, figure out what he was going to do, and then, he worked it through with Michael B. Jordan and Miles Caton, who, the other two actors, and they rehearsed it, they did it, they kept the camera rolling, right? And then the first cut of the movie that they saw in LA, the scene was cut out, and Delroy Lindo went to Ryan Coogler and told him, you can't cut that scene out, and, told him how important it was to the fabric of the film. Ryan Coogler agreed with him, and because Ryan Coogler had final cut, he put the scene back, and that scene is in the movie that we have seen. It's in the theatrical release. So essentially, this is the director's cut, because the director had final cut on this, right? Doesn't happen very often with respect to these particular pictures, original IP or otherwise, right? So he got that in his deal, Coogler did, and then the big one is that in 25 years, the rights of this film, Sinners, reverts back to him from the studio. And upon hearing about this deal and how it was going to shake the core of Hollywood, and that's all we heard. Hollywood insiders are upset. They're angry because of the slippery slope that this creates, and what is this going to mean for the future of the business and all that, that if a creator like Ryan Coogler is going to get a deal like this. And I had even speculated that perhaps the buzzing that we'd heard about Warner Brothers not being happy with Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdy had to do with this, because they were the ones that gave Coogler this type of deal. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why are they so upset about it? Like, what is the big deal? Are they that concerned about losing rights to an IP like this? But it's an indie movie. Why are they so worried about that? Well, studios are greedy in the first place. They want to retain control of everything. These are the same studios that, the reason the strikes happened over a year ago is because they wanted complete rights over a person's likeness to be able to do whatever they wanted with them in AI, in terms of recreation, in terms of voice, in terms of speech, in terms of acting. And performers are like, once we get a capture review, we can do whatever we want with it forever. Yeah, bullshit. Absolutely ridiculous. This is why the strikes happened. So Hollywood is greedy in that regard. So yeah, they wanted that. But there was a bigger reason why the Hollywood insiders are not happy about this. A bigger, more nefarious reason that people can definitely figure out. And Ryan Coogler even did an interview recently in the middle of the press tour for Sinners on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. And she asked him about all of the attention surrounding his new deal that he got for Sinners. And he said that he wanted to offer some clarification and some context that people weren't adding, and wanted to let people know that he's not the first filmmaker to get a deal like that. And indeed he isn't, if we do some research. Apparently 6 years ago, Quentin Tarantino got almost the exact same deal for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And yet, when that movie released, pre-pandemic, mind you, in 2019, and it was on a similar budget, I think around 90 million if I'm not mistaken, and its opening weekend was 40.4 million domestic, so that's very close to the 45 million domestic that Sinners made. The headline was, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a box office hit for Tarantino. Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt helped the director score one of the biggest opening weekends of his career. Really? From the dude that gave us Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained, right? So that's the headline you give him for a very similar performance with a very similar deal to what Ryan Coogler got for Sinners 6 years ago, pre-pandemic. What's the difference? We know what the difference is. And Amy Goodman, in the interview, Ryan Coogler says that he doesn't understand why more attention is being paid to his particular deal with Hollywood, but that he had guesses as to why. And she asks him in the middle of him continuing his answer, she says, "What are your guesses, Ryan?" And he literally went, I'd rather not say. And then he moves on. That's literally his answer. You can go look this up. Go look at the Democracy Now! YouTube page. The whole interview, I think, is like, the whole episode is like a little over 30 minutes. Go find that. I mean, I saw the clip on Threads that was reposted by somebody. He knows exactly what the reason is, and any one of us can determine exactly what the reason is. And as unfortunate as this might be, the truth of it is, it's because a black filmmaker got it. Like, when Quentin Tarantino gets a deal like this, or if somebody like Christopher Nolan or Martin Scorsese gets a deal like this, it's really not a big deal. And that's when you get the headlines like what Quentin Tarantino got for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But now you have a black filmmaker that does the exact same thing, exact same performance, gets the exact same deal, and oh my goodness, Hollywood's going to collapse. You've got producers and people, going on and off the record saying this is a slippery slope, this is a terrible idea. And do you think it's just because it's post-strikes? You think it's just because it's post-pandemic? Well, even if it is, that's still the industry's fault, because they didn't handle the pandemic as well as they could have, and they certainly didn't handle the strikes as well as they could have. These are the same fat cats, these are the same CEOs that, were sitting on their yachts waiting for the writers and the actors to break, because they knew at some point they were going to run out of money and they were going to have to come crawling back to them. And that didn't quite happen now, did it? And it wasn't for another 6 to 8 months, if I remember correctly. I think that's how long both the Writers' Strike and the Actors Guild strike went, where they finally came to the agreement and they finally hashed out a deal that both parties thought was fair, or that the actors and the writers thought was fair, and they went back to work. And the studios are still reeling from that. Warner Brothers, we know their financial situation is absolutely in shambles. They're in the red. They're banking a lot on the DCU. That's why there's a little bit extra pressure on James Gunn and Peter Safran with respect to the success of their franchise and the success of Superman, which will launch that franchise officially to the general audience on July 11th. We've seen other studios get involved in mergers and try, acquisitions and try to, stem the tide and make themselves more profitable as the system continues to struggle, if you will, not just post-pandemic or post-2020, I should say, but also in the wake of the strikes that were not very well handled by the Hollywood CEOs. And then here comes original black filmmaker Ryan Coogler with a Tarantino-like deal, and they don't like that. They can't handle that. That is a problem for them. And so that's when they go to Variety and they say, well, here, to make sure that you put this in your article, make sure you let the public know that this movie's got to make $185 million just to break even because of that ridiculous ass 2 times the production budget nonsense, and let them know about the marketing budget. Isn't it interesting? And I've talked about this before about how we really didn't care that much about marketing budgets whatsoever before BVS. It's interesting how that movie changed that conversation, because as soon as all the gatekeepers and as soon as all the pearl clutchers, whatever rationalization they could find to call that movie terrible or to call that movie a failure so they could bury it into the ground as quickly as they could, they immediately go to marketing budgets this and word of mouth that, and this is bad, that's bad, da 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 da, it's wrong, right? And now it's part of just the lexicon of us having a discussion about subjective quality of films and about whether or not films are good or bad. It's insane that we focus this much on money that isn't even ours, money that leaves our wallets and our pockets and goes into the bank accounts of studios and executives. It's ridiculous the way that we do that. And so that's what's been powering the naysaying narrative here at the beginning, at the outset of Sinner's release, is the idea of, okay, we've got to plant the seed of doubt in the audience because we've got to make certain that they realize this is dangerous and this is not a very profitable way to do business. And everybody basically has responded, at least the audience for Sinners has responded with a collective F you. And we can look at the numbers now and prove that. We'll get here. Box Office Mojo and thenumbers.com are reporting two slightly different numbers, but it's in the neighborhood of $161 to $163 million worldwide earned by Sinners in just 10 days of release. That's 122.5 domestically and 39.1 million internationally. And I read earlier today that thenumbers.com, here, let's go ahead and look at this article here on thenumbers.com. It says that Sinners will decline just 6% from its opening weekend to earn $45 million, according to Warner Brothers' Sunday morning projection. Taking out the film's $4.7 million in previews, it's actually up from last weekend, with Saturday's estimated gross $18.8 million, 14% higher than last Saturday. And according to Numbers.com, that is an off-the-charts crazy performance. That's what it said. That's their words. And there's more. They say that Sinners is headed to the third best second weekend ever for a movie that opened over $40 million. And for reference, the two movies that are ahead of it are Shrek and Avatar. And it says that what's even more impressive about that is that Shrek and Avatar opened for Memorial Day and Christmas Day weekends respectively, and that the closest any major film has come to having this hold outside of holiday periods is Twister's 10% decline all the way back in 1996. The Numbers is now saying, the Numbers.com is now saying that their model is predicting that Sinners will finish with $208 million at the domestic box office with a high side potential of $280 million, saying that it's already a virtual certainty for the top grossing film of the year, not based on previous IP, and will clearly have a long and very healthy run in theaters if Warner Brothers lets it, and they'd be fools not to. They said the studio notes this morning that the audience has broadened since opening weekend, with now a 50-50 male-female split compared to a 56% male audience on opening weekend. And it also says ethnic demographics have also expanded, with this weekend's audience 39% Caucasian, 35% African American, and 18% Hispanic. It says the South continues to over-index per the studio, but they're seeing strength across the entire United States. So to put it simply, the naysaying campaign didn't work. And you know what? We saw that firsthand because, the Saturday that we went to go see the film, again, my second time seeing it, Shonda's first time seeing it, Shonda wanted to see a later show. And that meant like somewhere, 5:30, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, somewhere around that. And I checked at all the theaters that we normally would go see that. Remember the Imagine chain of theaters that I normally go see with the EMAX? Well, I looked at just about all of them, and damn near all of them were nearly sold out. And not only, they weren't fully sold out at the time I was looking for tickets, which, mind you, was at like 11 a.m. to noon on that Saturday. I was looking for tickets like that earlier in the day. And they weren't fully sold out, but the seats that I would have wanted, which is, like back row center, completely filled, and all surrounding seats around them filled. So we ended up having to go to the same theater that we went to when we saw the preview of Justice League, the fan preview of Justice League way back when in 2017. It's a theater chain called MJR in Troy, Michigan. We went to that theater, and at the time that I bought our tickets for the 5:30 showing at that theater, only 6 tickets had sold outside of the 2 that I just bought for me and Shauna. So 8 tickets had sold as of like noon of that day, right? When we got to that theater around 5:30, it was about half full when we walked into the theater, and by the time the movie started, which was 15 minutes later, because man, were there a ton of previews and commercials, that theater was full. That theater was sold out on a second Saturday. So we have physical proof. We witnessed exactly that 14% bump that the numbers.com is talking about. And this audience that we saw the film with was an ideal audience to see the film with. Other than the dude that was sitting to the left of us that every like 10, 15 minutes would keep checking his phone and didn't turn the damn like brightness off or down on his phone. And it's like, okay, dude, stop flashing me with your damn phone in the corner of my eye, which I'm glad I sat to the left because I was closer to him because Shonda absolutely would have just, that would have like really pissed her off. And it was bothering me and she could see it a little bit, but she was still focused on the film itself. But either way, the audience itself was a really awesome audience in terms of like they were reacting to things on screen, but it wasn't like too much. Like they weren't going overboard and they weren't being unruly, and they were laughing at the humorous parts and they were reacting to some of the more dramatic parts, and you heard some chatter here and there, but it wasn't too overbearing. It wasn't too intrusive to the experience. You weren't telling people to shut up, right? They understood, and they were very respectful for the majority of the film. And when the credits rolled, applause. It's the first time in a while I've heard applause at the end of it. I didn't even hear applause it's been a minute since I've heard applause at the end of Marvel movies, no less. The first time in a long time I've heard applause at the end of a movie, like people actually applauding how great a movie was. And then, of course, almost half the theater left before the credits finished, which, if you haven't seen the film, don't leave before the credits finish. Don't leave before the credits finish, because technically the movie's not over. And I mean that literally. The movie does not end until after the technically mid-credit scene finishes. It's really not a mid-credit scene. It's really the end of the movie. I'm not even joking with you. Like, if you haven't seen the film yet, don't leave until the rolling credits start. When the rolling credits that scroll up and down the screen start, then you might be able to leave, but there is something at the very end, which isn't consequential to the plot, but there is a scene at the very end credits that is there if you want to stick around to see that. But my point is that this film has just absolutely captured the zeitgeist. And this film has definitely captured the general audience attention. And it is a case of an original IP doing extremely well, having incredibly great word of mouth, and now look at the success that it is generating. And that $185 million mark that Variety was told by the studio that it needed to make, well, it's on its way to that. It really is, and it's going to make that more than likely. And it'll be interesting to see what it does against Thunderbolts. I mean, I'm not predicting that it's going to, keep Thunderbolts out of, having a big opening weekend, but, that is one of the things that we've talked about with respect to the MCU is, with Thunderbolts being, it has a collection of characters from other Marvel projects that are going to be in it. How much is the general audience going to show up for that, given their attitudes towards phase 4 and 5 so far, if it hasn't been a sequel or a big team up, right? Because it's been mostly sequels and team ups that they've been showing up for, whether it's like I mentioned the other day, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which of course was directed by Ryan Coogler, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Spider-Man No Way Home, Deadpool and Wolverine. Those are your most successful MCU films in phase 4 and 5. All the others have not been that successful. And we know about Quantumania and the Marvels bombing in 2023. And even though I enjoyed Captain America Brave New World personally and put it in my mid tier for my MCU rankings, let's not act like its $414 million was anything that Marvel was necessarily counting on as far as expectations. So it will be interesting to see how Thunderbolts performs in the wake of Sinners and vice versa. But either way, there's no way that at this point in time you can't consider Sinners a rousing success, even from an objective data point standpoint. Like if it hits that $185 million mark, well then there you have it in that regard. And then you can have all your arguments about profitability, but why even have those arguments? Like what is even the point with respect to that? The fact of the matter is that this is an original IP that has been wildly successful in its first 10 days. With respect to it certainly made back its production budget and more, and without Warner Brothers giving us the exact number of like the dollar amount of marketing that they spent on the film, we're never going to know if that $185 million is actually break even or not. It may be a lot less than that in that regard, but that's the arbitrary number that Forbes goes with, and that's the arbitrary number that Variety went with in its article, and that's what we're supposed to follow, right? Well, whatever. Audiences have spoken, word of mouth has been incredibly strong. Buzz continues to grow with respect to this film, and it has been a rousing original IP success that Hollywood should be celebrating in triumph, especially at a time where theater going has been at a low and people have been, all the stuff that I've talked about, all the people want to blame it on the films and blame it on the non-original IP and all that. And, they continue to ignore what I bring up and what a lot of us bring up with respect to how expensive it is to go to the theater, how expensive concessions are, and how you got to find the time commitment, and you got to find a babysitter if you got kids, you got to do all this, you got to do that, put gas in the tank to get to the theater, right? All these other considerations in the world that we live in, economically speaking, that people just don't take into account, and yet these people are shelling out money hand over fist for an original story, an original black horror movie, about vampires and in the Jim Crow era, fighting them amidst the backdrop of sharecroppers in Mississippi and blatant racism at every turn. And it is sad that with the naysaying campaign early on to try and spite this movie and put an asterisk on its earnings, it is sad that we are seeing institutionalized racism with respect to that. And I'm sure some of you out there would be like, Ray, I think you're way off base. It can't be this, it can't be that. I'm sorry, guys. We live in a world where institutionalized racism is a thing. And it's not something that I bring up lightly. It's not something that I just decided to, hey, I'm going to take a crusade on this. You know how I feel about representation matters. You know how I feel about representation with respect to filmmaking, movies, TV, and other assorted media. You know that I believe it's important, and you know that I love to celebrate the successes of any of these films. I celebrated Black Panther by seeing it 3 times in the theater when it released in 2018. I celebrated Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I have spoken effusively about that film, and I wanted it to be Black Panther for the Asian community. I absolutely wanted that. And I do believe it is that with respect to the subjective quality of the film. It just unfortunately was hamstrung by 2020 and the pandemic in terms of its box office earning potential. It did not get a chance, it did not get a fair shake to earn the amount of money that Black Panther did, but it is still very important for Asian representation. I champion Black Adam. I'm one of the few people out there, I think, that champions Black Adam with respect to Middle Eastern representation in a superhero film. That's unheard of, and a lot of people don't talk about that still. They're too busy hating on The Rock and on how we were promised a Henry Cavill Superman that didn't happen, that didn't materialize because the DCEU was basically declared dead after that. But no one focuses on what that did for representation as far as Middle Eastern people are concerned. And of course, Blue Beetle, right? I was front and center for Blue Beetle, and that still is the first Latino-led superhero film in the shared cinematic universe era. So I champion diversity and I champion representation of all forms, and I celebrate all of these films because I think they're very important for all of these cultures. And Sinners is most certainly at the forefront of the conversation right now. So when people take pot shots at it, when we see a campaign like we've seen from Hollywood and from these trades trying to put an asterisk on its earnings, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to bring it up because it's bullshit. And there's nothing fair about it. And it most certainly affects everything that we're talking about here. It affects the viability of continuing the Spider-Verse films, right? Now we know we got a release date for Beyond the Spider-Verse, and that's great, that's fantastic. I'm glad that they're going to finish that trilogy. But as far as the future bankability of Miles Morales as Spider-Man, I think a lot of people, a lot of you maybe even think that that's just, hey, it's a no-brainer. Of course, they've got to go in that direction. Well, they have been dragging their feet on that for the last 20 years, and we have been treated to Peter Parker multiple times. And I enjoy all those films. I own every single one of the theatrical feature length live action Spider-Man films, and I own both of the Spider-Verse films, right? Okay. I am a Spider-Man fan through and through. You know this. I have enjoyed all the incarnations of Peter Parker. But why is it that we can only get Miles Morales, one, in animated form, and two, in video game form? And how much longer will it take for us to get it in live action form? I don't know. But these are questions that any of the rest of us can rightfully and legitimately ask these studios when it comes to stuff like this. Because when we see a film like this with a black director, black writers, largely black cast, almost entirely black cast in that regard, right? When we see a film like this from an original IP that does extremely well and captures the attention of the audience to sell out crowds for 2 weekends in a row, and the first thing Variety and the trades and studios do is put an asterisk and talk about how dangerous it is and how it could spell doom for the future of Hollywood because of the deal that the director got, that a number of other white directors have gotten in the past. That raises an eyebrow, guys, and it's not something that I think we should ignore. It absolutely is something that we should talk about because it is a part of the industry. It is. I've talked about, when people talk about Oscars so white, and the controversy over how the lack of diversity at the Academy Awards, and I've gone on record as saying that the problem is not with the Oscars, the problem is more deep-seated in terms of the membership of the Academy, and that's where you have to start working at it, with respect to the diversity of the Academy's ranks, so that you have more directors, more producers, more creatives, more writers, right, more composers, right? You need more members of the Academy to represent the actual cultural diaspora of the United States of America, and at that point, that's when you can really start to have more diverse categories, as far as like, nominees for the Oscars. It's got to start from the ground up. You can't just, every once in a while giving an Oscar to Will Smith or to Viola Davis or to Octavia Spencer, every once in a while, that is not like gonna cut it, or or Everything Everywhere All at Once, when Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan absolutely won their Oscars, got their flowers for that film, and I still feel Stephanie Hsu should have gotten her flowers for that as well, because she was the dark horse. She was the unsung hero, if you will, with respect to that film. I absolutely loved her performance in Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? But Jamie Lee Curtis won for that year, and no knock on Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, it's certainly not her fault, right? But I'm just saying these are things that are present in the industry that I don't believe we should ignore. And these are conversations that may make you uncomfortable, but that's a good thing. Should not keep you fearful from having these discussions, right? We should be able to have these discussions and have this discourse in a rational manner without getting, defensive, without acting like, oh, we're making a bigger deal out of nothing. No, there's something here, guys. There most certainly is. You can look at the stuff that is posted. Come on, Ben Stiller called it out. Ben Stiller called this stuff out, right? He called out it. Ben Stiller is like, regardless of how I feel about him as an actor, I don't care for his work. I'm not really a big fan of his. But when it comes to something like this, for him to call it out, for him to say, hey, WTF Variety, what is the deal with this headline? Like, what, like, why would you discount this? And there are a lot of actors, there are a lot of creatives that are like, why would Variety post this, right? I mean, you go on TikTok and Kevin Bacon and his wife, Kira Sedgwick, they leave the theater and they post a video about effusive praise, talking about how amazing the film was. Tom Cruise posts a picture of his ticket stub, how he went to go see it. These are people, these are creatives in the industry, regardless of ethnicity, that believe in the power of film, believe in the power of the theater, believe in the power of cinema, and they absolutely will 100% support that over the studios, over the executives, over the CEOs that want to bleed all of them dry, even the ones that get paid millions in that regard. And that's also why, if you read Ryan Coogler's thank you letter, or if you look at the special thanks that he has listed in the credits of Sinners, you'll see two names that will be very familiar to you. You'll see Christopher Nolan, and you'll see his wife, Emma Thomas. Why? Because he consulted with them with respect to the process, because he shot the film on 70mm IMAX, and Christopher Nolan is the IMAX guru, right? He is Lord of IMAX, right? I think he owns shares in IMAX. Like, he is the foremost IMAX filmmaker, like, on planet Earth. But on top of that, he's also one of the greatest auteurs of our time and one of the more successful filmmakers of our time, and he knows how to play the game. And if you think that Ryan Coogler is thanking him just because he taught him how to use IMAX cameras or gave him pointers on how to handle the 70mm format, if you think it was just that they talked about, well, bless your heart. Because I would bet dollars to donuts that a big part of why Ryan Coogler got the deal that he did is because Christopher Nolan said, okay, here's what you do, yada, yada, yada. Nolan knows how to play the game. Nolan understands. Nolan gets it. Nolan's been an executive producer for like well over a decade, almost 2 decades, if I'm not mistaken, with respect to Hollywood. He gets it. He understands it. This is a man that has made billions for Warner Brothers on Batman alone, and Ryan Coogler's done the same thing. Interesting how Ryan Coogler is on the same trajectory. He's on a similar trajectory, right? Like he comes out with his indie film, his original feature, Fruitvale Station, right? Similar to, not necessarily following for Christopher Nolan, but how about Memento, right? Memento is the first, the one that put him on the map for those of us that hadn't heard of him before, right? And then what does Nolan do? Nolan goes to, he does Insomnia, but then after that, he does Batman Begins. And he proves to Warner Brothers with the TDK trilogy, hey, I can earn you this money, this is what I can do. And he puts himself on the map so that after making $1 billion with The Dark Knight, they write him a blank check to do the movie that he really wants to do, Inception. And then he makes another $1 billion with The Dark Knight Rises, and they write him another blank check, essentially, to do Interstellar. And at that point, Christopher Nolan can do no wrong, and that's how he does Dunkirk, Tenet, and now Oppenheimer, and he's in the middle of doing The Odyssey, right? Like, he proved his worth, like, financial viability, if you will, to the studios, and got the studios to trust him implicitly, and now the man is making whatever he wants. Coogler is doing the exact same thing. He makes nearly $2 billion for Marvel on Black Panther films alone. And now he's succeeding with an original IP written by him, directed by him, that is completely from his own work, what he truly wants to do, which I think is funny. Like there are people out there that think that Marvel movies and comic book movies are the end-all be-all. And I actually saw somebody say that Sinners was just a bridge movie in between Marvel films for Ryan Coogler, because of course they want him to do a third Black Panther film, and they want him to do Blade now. Of course, especially since he answered that question, they asked him, what is your favorite black vampire? And he took like 30 seconds to think about it, and then he finally just settled on Blade because, in my opinion, he couldn't think of any other really popular black vampires. I can't think of any. Anybody out there think of any popular black vampires? Aside from Eddie Murphy and Vampire in Brooklyn, I can't think of any. Like, what else? Who else is he going to answer a specific question like that? Unfortunately, there haven't been that many. At least not that I can think of. If I'm missing any other than Blade, someone please let me know. What list did we have to sift through before Ryan Coogler could give that particular answer? But either way, how foolish is it, and how arrogant, and how stupid is it to believe that Sinners is a bridge movie in between Marvel films for somebody like Ryan Coogler? Give me a break. Ryan Coogler is an auteur. Ryan Coogler, very quickly in 5 films, is, as far as I'm concerned, elevating himself to the level of a Nolan as far as filmmaking talent and success is concerned. And by the way, he's got Christopher Nolan as a friend and colleague in the industry to do exactly what he's been doing for the last 10 to 15 years. So there you have it, the dangerous success of Ryan Coogler and Sinners, the original IP that has captivated the audience at will for the last 10 days and continues to captivate the audience going forward. And we'll see exactly how far it goes. Will it hit that 280 million mark? I certainly hope it does. I really do. I'm rooting for it tooth and nail. Wondering if I should go see it a third time. I tell you what, I've already got that 4K Steelbook pre-ordered. You can bet your ass. And if they even come out with it, like if they upgrade that, like, hey, collector's edition with bonus, you know good and damn well I'm going to upgrade to that as well. It will absolutely become a part of my library as soon as humanly possible. Incredible film. Best film of the year so far. It will be difficult to top going forward. And I say that even here on April 28th with, however many months left in the year and knowing all the other films that we have to see, this film of the year and an incredible landmark of filmmaking, and Hollywood should be celebrating it as such. This should be a glorious time for Hollywood. This should be a celebratory victory. This should be popping champagne bottles for Warner Brothers and Hollywood, right? So enough with this naysaying bullshit. Give Ryan Coogler and that cast and crew their flowers for bringing people back to the cinema with an original IP that doesn't have a superhero or some other type of comic book character or some other franchise character, dinosaurs or aliens or whatnot, lightsabers and etc., superpowers. An original IP bringing people to the theater and selling theaters out yet again. Before signing off on this sinners heavy episode of the show, I did want to take a moment to officially, in faster paced rant mode, eviscerate some of the dumber comments I've seen with respect to sinners on social media. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. First of all, enough with these stupid ass fan casts. Seriously, like if you are someone that just can't abide the idea, like maybe you don't like Michael B. Jordan as an actor. Okay, fine. You know, maybe you believe on some ridiculous level that Jonathan Majors really got a raw deal with respect to, his whole situation and how he got fired from Kang and his legal battle and whatnot, despite his marriage to Megan Good and all that. And you really thought that he should have been the other brother. But just say that you don't like Michael B. Jordan. Just be honest about it. What's with all these stupid ass fan casts? Okay, why are we casting Jonathan Majors as one? And I don't even know which one they're casting him as. I just know that they're like, Michael B. Jordan should have been one of them and Jonathan Majors should have been the other. Why? Why is that? No, Ryan Coogler did what he wanted to do. He likes Michael B. Jordan. Michael B. Jordan has been in every single one of his 5 feature films. All of them. Every last one of them. That includes Wakanda Forever because Killmonger does make a cameo. He does make an appearance in that film, if you remember correctly. I know many of you hate that movie now for irrational reasons, but that's your business. You can do whatever you want. It's all subjective. But enough with this fan cast. But this is why I don't do fan casts. This is exactly why I don't do fan casts. Because fans are crazy. Fans are fickle. Fans are impatient. Fans are ridiculous. The idea that you would shit on anybody's performance in that movie. Everybody in that movie gave it 100% plus. Everybody. There wasn't a single weak link in that entire cast. And the audacity of a number of anyone on social media, on Threads, or anywhere else to even think about recasting, oh, this person should have played Smoke, that person should have played Annie, that person should have played Mary. Get the F out of here with that fan casting ridiculous bullshit. Fans suck. Why do fans suck so hard? I don't understand. But many of them have just simply lost their damn minds. We're fan casting an incredibly successful film with a cast that acted its ass off, that acted their asses off, like for the entirety of the 2 hours and 17 minutes. Whatever. Ridiculous. To the block pile with you, as far as I'm concerned, on social media. Same with the people that are claiming that Sinners is demonic. Okay, look. You're talking to somebody, myself, I'm putting myself out here, okay? Christian, raised Roman Catholic, went to Roman Catholic schools from kindergarten through 5th grade. I like to call myself a recovering Catholic. If you believed that Sinners was demonic, I mean, first of all, you might take a look at the title before you decided to go see the movie. It's called Sinners. Not saints and sinners, not sinners go to hell, but sinners. That's literally what the movie is called. And if you're deciding that it, as a good Christian individual, that you're going to go see it, and I'm amazing, I'm bringing religion into this, but no, people that are calling the movie demonic, and I saw the bullshit stories about people standing up in the theater and going, I had to rebuke this film in the name of Jesus. It's a movie, and hate to break it to you, Christians, but Christianity is not the only faith that exists on this planet. Get over it. Well, I know that that is an impossibility for a number of people, but honestly, calling the film demonic, ridiculous. You know what else is ridiculous? Criticizing representation of other minorities in a 1932 Jim Crow-era Mississippi segregation sharecropping vampire movie. If you are an individual that doubts the amount of research that Ryan Coogler did for this script and for this film, you really don't need to look further than social media to see exactly how far he went. Because there have been deep dives and there have been plenty of conversations on the right corners of social media that have brought up exactly everything that he has referenced and how incredibly historically accurate it all is. From the Delta Blues to the sharecropping to all of the minorities that were represented in the film. And how they were represented in the film, including the non-brown minority that was very well represented in the film. That is as far as I will say, but if you've seen the movie, you know exactly who and what I'm talking about. But we got bad faith actors on social media talking about where was the Latino representation, where was this, where was that, and you think that's on Ryan Coogler. Listen, Ryan Coogler is part of the Black cultural experience, and he is telling a story from that perspective. And did he give his flowers, historically speaking, representative speaking, to the other minorities involved in that particular setting? Most certainly he did. As I said, go ahead and look up that research that he most certainly did. Plenty of conversations being had about it. But if you're somebody that is upset about general representation for your own minority with respect to any of these types of films. Like, we never see Latinos in horror movies like this. Well, that's not a complaint for Ryan Coogler. That's a complaint for David Zaslav. That's a complaint for Bob Iger. That's a complaint for the studio owners and for the executives and for everybody else that, quite frankly, doesn't greenlight these types of movies very often whatsoever, because they keep telling us that these types of movies don't sell. And they keep being proved wrong a lot of times when these movies do what Sinners does. If they put a little bit of marketing faith behind it, just a little bit of a skosh of effort, right? Not even the same amount of effort as they're going to put into Superman. Not even the same amount of effort as they'd put into an Avengers movie or a Hall H appearance for the Marvel Cinematic Universe or anything like that, right? Just a fraction of that behind a movie like Sinners, and it's amazing the audiences that it will attract. It's amazing what it will do. It's amazing the cinema scores that it will absolutely garner. They just give a little bit of energy. Those are the people to direct your ire at. The studios, not the creatives like Ryan Coogler. The burden of proof is never on the creatives, especially the minority creatives. They're telling the story that they fought like hell to get told, one way or the other. And the studio owners and executives are literally the gatekeepers. As Morpheus says, they are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them. So if for some reason you're upset that your minority wasn't represented in this particular minority film, where a number of minorities were represented very historically accurately, take your ire to David Zaslav and Warner Brothers, because it's on them, not Ryan Coogler. Frankly, if Ryan Coogler was actually interested in franchising Sinners, which I don't know that he is or isn't, despite what people have told me on social media, if he was interested in franchising Sinners, there's a couple of different spin-offs that he could do. And there's one particular minority group in the movie that I would love to see a spin-off movie of, and they should get a director from that particular minority group to lead that way, to lead that charge, right? To write that script and to direct that film. And Coogler can be the executive producer. He can literally be the Black Nolan for his own franchise that the rights will revert back to in 25 years. It would be amazing. It would be outstanding. And that movie would be badass, especially with the time that we saw this particular group in the film. And again, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly who I'm talking about. You know what minority group I'm talking about. Is like, oh, I want to see that prequel. I want to see that prequel / sequel or whatever happens or what they do. Oh yes, absolutely. I would. That was the first thing I thought. I was like, I would love to see an expansion of that. But that's kind of my last little ranty gripe here, is the people that are saying there doesn't need to be a sequel, there doesn't need to be prequels. It's horrible that we immediately think of franchising, that we immediately think of, sequelizing, and that's what our brains immediately revert to. Cut the shit with that, okay? Listen, here's the deal. I understand that the film elites are upset about franchises, right? They're tired of reboots, they're tired of remakes, they're tired of superhero films, they're tired of large IPs being redone and huge mass marketing. We want more original films, not this redone schlock over and over again. Well, here's the problem, you arrogant dipshits. There are plenty of people in the general audience and within fandoms that enjoy those reboots and remakes, that enjoy that massive IP. Don't give me this shit about Marvel is dead. No, it isn't. You just don't like it anymore. DC is dead. No, it isn't. You're just being a pissy bitch about it. Does Hollywood need to invest more in original IP like Sinners? Yes, I believe they do. To give original filmmakers and writers a chance, a seat at the table in order to tell their stories and preserve the art form in that regard. But that doesn't mean we get rid of franchises. That doesn't mean we toss them in the garbage. And it also doesn't mean that when an original minority filmmaker creates a film that absolutely could be franchised, and again, in 25 years, the rights would revert back to him, so he would actually retain control of it as it was franchised and expanded, that we just squash the idea of it ever being franchised and saying it doesn't need to be franchised. It was a great standalone story. It is a great standalone story. It can stand on its own. But if Ryan Coogler decided to franchise it, there's nothing wrong with that. And you should accept that. We shouldn't be squashing that immediately. And don't give me this shit about, from a movieweb.com article about how he said he wanted to get away from franchise films. He said that he wanted to get away from franchise films after doing 2 Marvel movies. That's why he did Sinners. It doesn't mean that he's completely against doing franchise films going forward. And the decision is ultimately his as to whether or not he wants to franchise Sinners. And I'm not saying that he should. I would personally like him to. I think it would be amazing for a black creator to have a franchise like that, because last I checked, franchises shouldn't only be for white filmmakers. It shouldn't only be for filmmakers that aren't brown, right? Do you realize that since 1991, Quentin Tarantino has basically been given carte blanche to make his own damned universe? All 9 of his feature films, including Death Proof, happen in the same universe. And those are just the ones he directed. How about the ones he wrote, like True Romance or From Dusk Till Dawn? How is it that he's allowed to build his own cinematic universe, but the second anybody suggests that Ryan Coogler do the same with Sinners, no, we don't need that. No more franchises. Bullshit on a stick. Now look, the decision is ultimately up to Ryan Coogler. He can do whatever he wants, right? Because it's his film, it's his original IP. And look, if you watch that film, there are plenty of ways that they could branch off and do some other spin-off shit. They could really build something out with that particular universe. And maybe as a fan of someone who wants to see more black science fiction and fantasy stories adapted, if you will, more of our work in the science fiction and fantasy realm in movies and television, right? You know, somebody that was a fan of Lovecraft Country and is still pissed off that it didn't get renewed for a second season. Maybe I am somebody that wants to see that happen. That's my own personal wish. But it is ultimately Ryan Coogler's decision, and I will respect his decision regardless of what it is. If he wants to keep Sinners as a solo film, great. I'll still own it, and I will still herald it as an incredible piece of work. If he wants to franchise it, I will be happy about that as well. But I am tired of the zero-sum proposition from film elitists where it's either franchise or original. You can't have both. Bullshit, I can have both. Hollywood says I can have both. Both work. Both are profitable, and we don't need to get rid of one in order to have the other prosper. Again, the problem lies with the studio heads. The problem lies with the CEOs. The problem lies with the people in charge who are treating this as zero-sum. Why are you following their lead? Why are you listening to what they say? Why are you acting like they should only listen to themselves and not listen to you, the audience? They most certainly should be listening to you, the audience, with respect to what you want to see. And in many cases they are when it comes to the franchise films and the big IP stuff. But when it comes to original films, you should make your voice heard on that too. And everybody that has seen Sinners and is going to go see Sinners to this point is making their voice heard and is showing Warner Brothers and Hollywood, hey, we like this shit too. So it's not a zero-sum proposition. And all these people, all this sentiment, you know, I've seen a number of people just go, it doesn't need this, it doesn't need that. In your world, it doesn't need that. But it's not like everything all of a sudden gets ruined if it decides to be franchised. And it's also not a missed or a lost opportunity automatically if it isn't franchised. Creatives should be allowed creative freedom to expand however they wish. And in a case like this, where Ryan Coogler actually can retain the rights to his own project in 25 years, I would like him to have some say, right? Instead of us telling him, hey, franchise it, or hey, don't franchise it, right? Never mind our bullshit pressure, right? Never mind our fickle fan behavior. Let Coogler do what he wants to do. And keep the door open-minded for all of it, as far as I'm concerned. That's my whole point. And that just really drew my ire with respect to morons that just want to automatically say, no, this shouldn't happen, or no, that can't happen. Bullshit. It's whatever Coogler wants to have happen, as far as I'm concerned. Because you know me, I'm the big believer in creative freedom across the board, right? And it's not just for certain filmmakers. It's not just for certain circumstances. It's across the board for all creatives, whether it is Ryan Coogler, whether it is Zack Snyder, whether it is James Gunn. Creative freedom for all of them, as directors, writers, and producers, all of them in that regard. So there you have it. There ends my little rant with respect to all the dipshits that have been saying ridiculousness about Sinners over the last week and a half. And I think that just about does it with this particular episode of the Flightcast. Again, a more ranty, introspective, socioeconomic, social-political look at Sinners and what's been going on. It's been a while since I've done an episode like this. I remember I used to do a decent amount of episodes like this during the conflicted days of the DCEU. Remember, I talked about the Ray Fisher stuff when that was going on, and all the stuff with Warner Brothers was treating Zack Snyder's Justice League. I used to do episodes like that a lot, and you know what? When stuff like that happens, even outside of the comic book movie realm, I feel like some time and energy and effort should be paid to that, to highlight that. So thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have any thoughts about anything that I've brought up in this particular episode with Sinners, or anything else with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media that you want to rap about on Friday Flight, You know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast, on Blue Sky at Flightcast. There's the Flightcast YouTube page, the post right underneath the posting for this particular episode. There's the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there. Remember, we're talking Andor Season 2 on Wednesday on Flightbox, the second 3-episode arc of the second and final season of the heralded Disney Plus Star Wars series. And of course, Friday Flight, the deadline for Friday Flight, 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time to get your emails and feedback in for that episode. So until then, like I said, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.